Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of 2024, which is coming a little bit late, but it's a video that I've honestly been itching to film, but I have been so sick for the past week and a half almost, and I was just not in a place to film. Like, I made my favorites list before I even got sick, and then on the days that I was free to film, I was just not up to it. So I'm finally feeling better now, and I'm gonna really try to get this video edited and out quickly because it's overdue in my mind. I really wanted to have it out before New Year's, but it is what it is, and I'm obviously not going to go without talking about my favorite books of last year, so this is where we're at. So when I made my favorites list, I didn't really give myself any strict rules, but I generally don't include rereads, just because I'm focused on the favorites from that year that were new to me, and new experiences for me. But a couple of honorable mentions that I do have just very quickly are Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, and then The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, which is also book 2 of the Winternight trilogy. I reread the Winternight trilogy from 2023 moving into 2024, and then reread the Stormlight Archive all this year in preparation for Wind and Truth. So those were exciting rereads for me, and they remained favorites. Honestly, the entire Winternight trilogy is a favorite. That's just my favorite book out of the 3 of them, and Words of Radiance will always be amazing. So those 2, I really loved them, but I have 14 other books to talk about here that were all new to me this year, and even though I didn't force myself to pick necessarily, we do have like one book from each author, one book from each series going on here, just because I did have kind of an easy time picking, except for one. But we'll get to that. But aside from that, a lot of these are standalones, and not all of them are fantasy, and we have a good range here, I think. So I don't tend to rank my favorites. I am just going to talk about them in the order that I read them in 2024. So without further ado, let's get right into it. My first favorite of the year is Foster by Claire Keegan, and this is an extremely short book coming in at like, I think 88 pages, something like that. So it is very much a novella, and this story follows the perspective of a young girl who's about 9 years old, and she, it's set in Ireland, and she goes to stay for the summer with, I believe it's her aunt and uncle, like a relative of her parents, and she doesn't really know when or if she's going home again, but she is being taken care of by this very sweet couple who have a lot of love to give to her and are in a position to care for a child. And it's very emotional and very like quiet literary fiction, but the perspective being from the young girl is so unique and such a smart choice in my opinion, because it makes this so heartfelt, because you get to feel her feeling like the love of her caregivers while also not fully understanding what's really going on here, where she does pick up on some clues where the reader kind of gets more of a full picture of the situation from an adult perspective, but it has that duality, and I don't want to say more because it's just so short, but it really left a lasting emotional impact, and I loved it. And then I also read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan this year, and I really enjoyed that one too, but it didn't make it onto the favorites list. Foster is definitely my favorite of the 2 Claire Keegan. However, the movie for Small Things Like These was also great. So if you are looking to get into Claire Keegan in any capacity, I can recommend any of those, whichever you are most interested in starting with. Next up, we have an appearance from one of my favorite fantasy authors, and that is The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch. And so this may come as a surprise to some of you because The Lies of Loch Lamora was one of the first books I actually read when I was starting to get into fantasy booktube and starting to get exposed to more of this community, because I took that recommendation from Murphy back in the day because it is and continues to be one of her favorites. And so I read and loved that. But eventually when I came to the realization that it had been a long time since the release of this 3rd book, I stopped after Red Seas Under Red Skies, and I wasn't sure if I was going to read Republic of Thieves until there was any news on like the fourth book. And now luckily we're in a position where Scott Lynch is releasing some novellas in this world, and he seems to be making progress. But the reason why I picked this series back up and did a reread of the first two and then read this is because me, Ben, Bryce, and Murphy were all reading together and doing discussions on the books, which was really fun because the first two are favorites for me. And so because of that momentum, I continued through to read Republic of Thieves for the first time. I hadn't read it the previous time. And in terms of enjoyment, I have to just say this is exactly what I expected because I loved it. It still has Scott Lynch's like fun writing style, the character voices that are so strong in his writing, just the characters kind of interacting and their personalities, they come through so well, which is one of the things that I love about him. And then the flashbacks in this book are particularly interesting and fun because they get to they allow us to see some characters that we haven't seen in a while and to meet some other people, and they are a unique look into kind of important things that have made Locke and Jean who they are as adults. And this book kind of just has the icing on the cake of Locke and Jean having to play politics in a way that we haven't seen them really have to do in the spotlight to this point because they're more used to working in the shadows, which of course they still do and they still use to their advantage because those are their strengths. But this entire series has been so enjoyable to me. I don't know which book is my favorite. If I were to be asked right now, I think it would probably change just based on my mood. But in my opinion, this might be slightly weaker in terms of plot or pacing than the other two, but they all come in at like basically equal levels of enjoyment. The third book I have on this list is my only like nonfiction pick, and it's not so much a nonfiction book as it is a memoir and a collection of like stories, but that is A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. And so this is, it's a collection of stories in a sense, but it's a collected memoir where these stories are all written by Alicia Elliott, and they are all various takes on her life experience, her experience as an Indigenous person, like things that happened to her growing up, everything that has kind of informed like her formation as a person, like her formative years, and a lot of really personal things in here, a lot about different locations in Canada that she has been and that she has lived, a lot about her family, how she has formed relationships, how she has felt about like food and her body and self-worth and body image, a lot of things like that. And this was like so well written and so well put together. There were maybe a couple of stories that I didn't think were as tightly like edited, but that's only in comparison to some of the others because most of these stories they hit so hard and they stuck so tightly to a theme. Like, she's a phenomenal storyteller, even though these are her own personal stories. Like, she's so good at honing them to a point, and like making that point that she's trying to make that is very impactful when you read the story. So most of them were like that. There were a couple of them that I didn't think were as tight thematically, but overall, this was an incredible book. And I do want to read her novel, I think, at some point, but this is one of those situations where, like, this author has come out with two things that are so different. Like, I've read her memoir stories and essays, but, like, the other book she's come out with is fiction. So I know I love her writing, but I also know that it probably looks a lot different in a completely different project. So I'm hopeful that I would like that as well, and I will read that at some point, I'm sure. The fourth favorite that I have to talk about is The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie, and this is the one I was referring to when I said that it's kind of hard to pick a book from this series to call a favorite, because A Little Hatred, The Trouble with Peace, and The Wisdom of Crowds are all they're all incredible, and not only that, but this series is written in a way where the books, they all kind of meld into one another. Like this final trilogy in the first Law World is very much like one long book with breaks because there have to be, or else the one book would be too long. But The Trouble with Peace stands out as the strongest in my opinion, but even now it's hard to remember what specifically happens because the events just continue through all three books. Like this trilogy as a whole is a favorite, but I guess I can't really say a ton other than the fact that this trilogy is heavily inspired by the Industrial Revolution, especially in like Britain. It has that inspired setting and like a very heavy emphasis on class divide and the working class and the struggles. And it's a very interesting thing to watch because of the sort of eras that we've covered in this series so far. Like times are massively changing, but it retains Joe Abercrombie's work with characters. There are some insanely good standout characters in this series, Savine and Orso, just to name a couple of them, but pretty much all of them are amazing. Then you have his work with like everything political that's going on and war in multiple places, but how it all forms together to kind of be relevant and how he threads all that together while still emphasizing that like there is some magic in this world, but we see some of that, but we also see a world that is very divorced from that, and people are dealing with very mundane problems, which are giving you more of like the class rage problems, and there's a lot of kind of explosive revolutionary vibes, and it's honestly just amazing the way that he brings it all together. So 100% recommend this, but of course this is the third trilogy in the first Law series, so really you should just read all of it. Number 5 on my favorites list is Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this deals with a flintlock era fantasy and our main character, who is named Emily Marshwick. And Emily Marshwick is essentially like a gentlewoman, like a character that you would see lifted straight out of a Jane Austen novel. And she and her family are dealing with their country going to war with their neighboring country over a revolution that was internalized in the other country at first, but then ended up in a clash with their country. And they have essentially been losing this war. More and more people are called to the front lines until they are essentially out of men and boys, almost to the point where a lot of women do have to enlist and go fight on the front. And Emily Marshwick is one of those people. And that is sort of the baseline concept here, and a lot happens after that, but this is a character focused and like kind of horrors of war focused novel, and there is a journey of discovery, like self-discovery and kind of discovery of what war is really like and what has been happening to everybody that has been sent to the front so far, and kind of like opening your eyes to what's really going on. And I love Adrian Tchaikovsky's writing. This is the first book that I've read from him, and like obviously it immediately became a favorite because it made it to this list. But I am so excited to get into more of his stuff because I loved his characters. Emily Marshwick is such a strong protagonist for this book, and you even have a little bit of like rivalry and questionable friends to potentially lovers thrown in. So it's a really interesting mix of plot lines and mix of genres when you also have a lot of horrifying things going on in here, but it's a really great balance that he strikes, and so I just loved my experience reading this. Okay, next up at number 6, we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, and this is a novel that actually is quite short. I think this is only like 230 pages or something, but this is one that I was a little bit more unsure what I would think going in because I wasn't really sure what the vibes were, and this is something that Ben had read before me and he brought to be part of our collection, but the names are escaping me right now. The wife's name is Leah. But okay, so our main character is named Miri, and we see Miri struggle. Hi, Maisie. We see Miri struggle because her wife Leah does undersea like exploration missions, like in a submarine type thing, and works for like kind of like a research facility. But Leah has been gone for a long time, and they're being very secretive about it. The mission that Miri's wife was on did not come back. There were other people on it too, but like Miri is not able to really get them to tell her anything about it. But then Leah finally does come back, but she's different, and Miri knows that something is different and something is wrong. And you kind of explore from there, where there's a little bit, one thing that I really liked is that there's a little bit of a dual perspective here, where we get like the present day, very sad, melancholy, like attempts to kind of repair their marriage, where Miri really just wants her wife back, but you also intersplice those with some scenes and chapters from what was happening down on the submarine mission. And I like was just so sucked into this. I was so intrigued about what we were going to learn about what actually happened. And for me, this like resolution and ending was the perfect combination of like learning enough information but keeping enough back, and letting things kind of be a little bit mysterious and letting everything run its course. And the symbolism of like trying to save your marriage after something happens like definitely doesn't have to be taken literally with everything that progresses, but I loved the things that did happen that were used in that comparison and that were used to illustrate like what was happening in this relationship. So I just thought this was amazing. I should definitely reread this at some point because it is so short. I think it would be really interesting going back and reading it, knowing where it's going and just seeing like what kind of is signposted along the way, and enjoying the writing and how like Julia Armfield put this together. So we have a couple other books by her, and Ben has also read Private Rights. And I don't believe either of us have read Salt Slow yet, which is a collection of stories, but I would like to read both of those, and I'm very excited about them given how much I loved Our Wives Under the Sea. Okay, next up at number 7, I have Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young, and Macy is being very, very needy right now. So in this novel, we have our main character named Emery, and Emery lives on a very secluded island, which I cannot remember the name of. Oh, Saoirse. So Saoirse Island. And Emery is like, I believe 29 or 30 and has lived on this island her entire life and has been kind of trained and poised to take over the apothecary that like her parents and grandparents have run. And like the same is kind of true for a lot of other people that grew up on the island. Like it's a very tight-knit community, and it's a little bit of a secretive community because this is a tourist spot as well, so they cater to that clientele. But in terms of actually kind of cracking the circle of people who live on the island, they're a very secretive community, and that is for a reason, because there is some like magical aspects going on here. And we also have another character named August, and August would be the same age as Emery but has been gone from the island since he was 17, right after their high school graduation, because August was Emery's boyfriend, and he was accused of killing her best friend because her best friend died, and August was accused of the murder and was essentially exiled from the island. But now August's mom has died, and he needs to come back to kind of take care of her final affairs. So he's kind of forced to come back and reckon with some of the people that he hasn't seen since he was a teenager, and people who either do or don't believe that he was the one who committed the murder, and a lot of kind of contentious emotions about him on the island. So we go from there, and we kind of go from him going back there and the storyline unfolding. And I read this in the fall, I think. Did I? Maybe I just thought that this would be the perfect read for fall, because I definitely read this in the summer now that I'm thinking about it. But this has like the perfect combination for me of like the small town vibes, the like intricate and secretive relationships between people, especially with the magic and witchy vibes. And then when you throw in like the romance, it was all, and the mystery. This was just a perfect combination for me, which I think I said in my wrap up after I read this. And I just loved like how everything combined. It genuinely was a book that felt like it was written for me, and I think that that is why I loved this so much. I thought it was really well written, and it did prompt me to buy more of Adrienne Young's books. And I have yet to read another one, but I am really looking forward to it because I really liked the edge of fantasy that was in here, while a lot of the interpersonal problems felt very grounded and real world, but it was a great balance. And so yeah, I obviously loved this. Okay, we are officially more than halfway through the list, and our first romance, and only romance I think, kind of, on the list is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And this is the first book that I've read by this author, even though I know that I didn't go in order with this series, but I think that's okay. I loved it regardless. So in this book, we have Justin and Emma, and the kind of concept here is that both of them feel like they are cursed when it comes to dating, and every time they date someone and then break up with them, the person that they broke up with goes on to find their soulmate. So they think that they're just cursed to be like the person right before. Like, they're not going to be anybody's soulmate, they're going to be like that person's stepping stone to find their forever person. And so they think that it would be easy to break the curse if they just dated each other and then broke up, because if they cancel each other out, then they should both be able to go on to find their separate soulmates. And so that is obviously like a very intriguing and fun setup. I really liked it as a setup, but I can't say that I think it's spoilers that this is a romance book, and the two of them obviously are going to have something going on. But the reason that I really loved this and that it brought it over the top from just like a fun read was the emotional challenges that both Justin and Emma have in their lives and that they face in this book. I really like it when romance books include stuff like that. It's kind of similar to how I felt about Happy Place by Emily Henry, because that is a bit of a heavier book in some ways. And so this one definitely had that aspect as well. And I think that the reason I like to see that so much is because you can see how the couple that you're reading about kind of cares for each other and helps to support each other and learns more about each other in a setting that's not like purely idealistic. They learn stuff about the tougher sides of each other, and they kind of have to go through a bit of a struggle, but then come out on the other side, hopefully better for it. So I really loved this. I think that Abby Jimenez's writing of the romance was phenomenal. I really liked like the emotional connection and the characters, so I'm definitely going to be picking up more of her books. Number 9 on my favorites is The Lions of Al Rasan by Guy Gabriel Kay. And this is sort of like a historical fiction fantasy that is technically set in a secondary world, but the main locations that these places are taking, or that these storylines are taking place in, are analogous to the Iberian Peninsula, so like Spain, France, Portugal, that area. But we have a very, very like political but also character focused journey in this book. It's honestly hard to sum up in few words, but the 3 kind of cultures and like religious cultures that we have are the Jadites, the Asherites, and the Kindath. And then we have 3 kind of characters, Amar ibn Khairan, Rodrigo Belmonte, and Jahan Bat Ishak, that are 3 main characters, and they kind of each represent their cultures in a way, because we have one of them coming from each culture, but it's a lot more complex than that. But their interpersonal relationships that they form throughout the course of the book and everything that happens kind of reflects on the ways that people are in conflict or could, avoid conflict if they were able to get to know each other as people instead of just looking at each other as like a monolith culture. And so there's a lot of really valuable commentary in the book, but that's not even necessarily the strength. Like, the strength really does come from these characters and getting to know them and their personal motivations and how they react to the world around them, and everything leading up to this inevitable point where they know they're going to have to be in conflict with each other at some point, but they don't want to, and everything just gets so complicated. And so this was an incredible book, and I just loved the experience reading this. And so again, this is my first Guy Gabriel Kay, which I think is kind of a common theme with my favorites from 2024, where I'm really excited to read more from these authors because these were like my first times dipping my toes in, but I'm definitely going to be reading more Guy Gabriel Kay, and I'm really, really excited about it. Okay, so as we get to number 10 on the favorites list, one thing about 2024 is that in that calendar year, I read more self-published fantasy books than I ever have before, because I was part of Mel's takeover reading the finalists for SPIFBO 10, and so I have some videos from earlier in the year about that and the books that I read that were the finalists. But I also was reading as part of Cassidy from Covers with Cassidy's judging team for the first round of SPIFBO 11. So now that we are in the new year, like, the finalists have been announced some time ago, but we are firmly into the finalists territory now for SPIFBO 11. But we were reading for the first part of the competition, where all 300 books are still in play, and the judges get to decide how to split up their portion between their team and everything like that. And I was lucky enough to read and nominate a book that I really loved as Cassidy's semi-finalist, which she then nominated as her finalist. So that was really, really exciting. Obviously exciting for me because I found a book that I really loved from this experience. So that is The Oathsworn Legacy by K.R. Ganji. And when I was judging, I was provided with like EPUB versions of the books, which is something that they do for the judges. But I went and bought the paperback copy after I read this, because of course it would be unrealistic for me to buy all of the books that I was needing to read for that like judging portion. But this is definitely my favorite self-pub book that I read this year, and I really wanted to support the author, and that's where we are now. But here I am to talk about it on my favorites list. So the Oathsworn Legacy is honestly a very unique book because it's not set up the same way as most novels are, even though it does have like a through line and a connected storyline. So we follow two brothers named Raleigh and Balin, and they are kind of like monster hunters. They're kind of like contract hunters, where they will take on jobs that people need various things done, or like defeated, or they're in danger and they need the help of like professionals. So with that setup, we have a book that is kind of set in short stories. And throughout Raleigh and Balin's careers, we kind of get these snapshots where each chapter is a story about a job they've done. But it's very important, at least in my opinion, to know that even if you aren't directly starting the next chapter right after the end of the last chapter, you still are progressing through their lives, and you are progressively adding information to your arsenal because all of it is relevant to the wider story and the kind of the plot, like the bigger bad that they end up needing to face. All of these things have been important and relevant, and we've been shown like the important points and snapshots up to the like more major fights. So I really loved the kind of found family aspect of this book because as the stories go on and you get deeper into the book, you do kind of add people to the crew, so to speak. Like the brothers will meet someone during one of their jobs, and that person will become important to them. And it is one of their goals to open up a school to help people who want to train to become these hunters, and that provides sort of a central point for people to form relationships, and you get to like know some of these characters a little bit better, some of these characters that have been in multiple of the stories. And I thought it was really well done. I was really invested in a lot of the characters, and I thought that the ideas in a lot of these stories in terms of what they're fighting, the types of magics that they're seeing, the ideas for like how each job plays out, a lot of it was so unique and things that I hadn't seen before and like really creative, and I loved that. And I just have like all positive things to say about it. It really tugged at my heartstrings. By the end, when things are getting real, it was very clear how much I had come to care about these characters. So this was absolutely the standout for me this year, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for getting into self-pub fantasy. And I have a vested interest in it doing well in the Spiffbo finals. So best of luck to the Oathsworn Legacy. Number 11 on my favorites list is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. And this is a book that I read very, very quickly. I read this while me and Ben were in Kelowna, and I think that this was on a day where we had done so much stuff in the morning and in the first half of the day that we ended up having a little bit more of a chill evening where like we probably went for dinner, but we spent a lot of time sitting by the water's side and just like reading on a bench. And I'm pretty sure I finished this in that day and the next day because it was so compelling. And this is, I believe, a 1995 release, if I'm not mistaken. And the concept here is this kind of post-apocalyptic feeling sci-fi situation where there are all of these women who are living underground in a bunker together that is essentially like a prison cell. They are surrounded by bars on all sides. They are all living in this space that has no like partitions. They are fully exposed, and they have men guarding them on all sides at all times, and none of them know why they're there. And then we have our main character who was a young girl when this started and is the only person in her like bunker that doesn't remember life before this happened. A lot of these older women, even if they don't know what happened in the world or why they were put here, they remember living life before this. They know what it used to be. And so you have this young girl who kind of is trying to learn about herself as a person and the space she takes up and who she even is and what it even means to be a woman, and trying to kind of learn about how the world used to be, but nobody really wants to talk too much about it, and the prisoners are not allowed to touch each other, so kind of providing human like comfort is not too much of an option. But one day they have the chance to escape. Something gives them the chance to escape, and they take it, but it's not necessarily clear like what happened and to what end. But the women press on, and they form their relationships and their bonds. And yeah, it's a very strange book and very like focused on the characters and focused on an internal monologue and the thoughts and feelings of our main character, and how she kind of learns and feels about everything that happens around her. And it's definitely not like the exciting type of sci-fi or post-apocalyptic setting, but it is extremely interesting and intriguing and leaves you with way more questions than answers, but like left a really deep impression. I will probably reread this at some point too. It's one of those books where like it won't give you answers if you reread it, but I feel like every time you reread this, you would have a new perspective on what you've read. Number 12 on my favorites list is probably the book that I can say the least about, and that is Memories of Ice by Stephen Erickson. And the reason I can say the least about it is just because Malazan is so dang complicated that I feel like it's so hard to unravel all of the plot threads that are going on in this series that it's not hard to understand, it's just hard to explain in my own words to other people. Like, I don't know how I can possibly capture the feeling, like the vastness of this series. Like, you see so many locations and cultures and different people in different life positions, and you see like a lot of armies and battles, and like campaigns and clashes of like powerful individuals. There's some mystery, like there's a central mystery in this one concerning like a force that the army is campaigning against, but it's kind of unclear where the heart of this enemy is getting its power from. And there's just mysteries of the world because there's constantly new information to be uncovered. This book also wrenched my heart out with the death of a certain character that I loved. Even though a lot of people die in these books, it was just a particular death that really did it to me. But it was a fantastic time, and I have currently read 4 books in this series, and I'm going to be starting the 5th one quite soon because I do want to read that in January, and just continue on this journey. Number 13, or the second last book on my favorites list, is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. So this is the second book in the Emily Wilde series, and I really enjoyed the first one, but I loved this one. So I think that it's probably because I already had that love for the first one. It wasn't quite as strong, it wasn't quite like 5-star territory for me, but I really enjoyed my time with it, and this one takes everything that I loved about the first one and just kind of does it more. And I already have that investment in the characters, and we get to see a little bit more of the wider fantasy aspects of this like fae world in this one, and we get to see more types of fae, and we get to learn a little bit more about the politics of like how our characters might be wrapped up in those politics. And so I really liked this. I thought it was a perfect blend of the characters' personal investment in what was going to happen mixed with like their academic investment, because of the fact that they are very much still studying the Fae and looking to create academic research from what they learn. But they also definitely have a personal investment. And I loved the side characters that we got in here, and I loved the way that the romance developed, and I just loved everything about it. So if you were unsure whether to continue in this series, I guess it probably depends what you liked about the first one, but I personally thought that this second book was even better, so can't recommend it enough. Last but not least, number 14, we have The Warm Hands of Ghosts, the book which cemented Catherine Arden as one of my favorite authors, because I have now read 4 books from her, 3 of them part of the same trilogy, and now The Warm Hands of Ghosts, and I've loved all of them. So I love Catherine Arden's writing, and in this installment, this is also a historical fantasy, but of a much different type from Winter Night. This takes place during World War I, and we have our main character, Laura Ivan, who was a field nurse who got discharged and sent home to Canada, Halifax to be specific. And she is present at home in Halifax when the Halifax Harbor explosion happens in late 1917. So after leaving the war, she has experienced that, which has taken her parents away from her. And then she hears that her brother is missing in action from the front lines. But she thinks that there is something suspicious about her brother being like reported dead, but then they don't have some of his belongings that they would have if they had found his body. So no one really knows what happens to him, and she wants to go back overseas and try and find out firsthand what happened to her brother. And as she does so, she hears rumors about, like, it's sort of like a speakeasy, or like a place where soldiers can go to that offers them like this intoxication, like this oblivion from the pain of the war. And she kind of follows that trail, and there's a very almost like surreal horror aspect to this book, because there is some very dark things going on that I really liked the tone that it lent to this book, and it was very fascinating. But we do follow our characters into a lot of dark places, and we also see a lot of struggle from the people who were involved in the front lines of World War I. And of course, a lot of people are aware of how horrifying like the casualties were during Passchendaele, which is where a bulk of this takes place. And so this is overall quite dark, but it also has an element of balance to it, where there are some genuine relationships formed, like some genuine friendships and some things to hold on to, which is, in my mind, symbolic of the fact that human connection is something to hold on to for a lot of these people throughout all of this. And I really loved this, but I definitely feel like you have to like a historical fiction aspect. You can't just be looking for a fantasy with a little bit of historical fiction aspect, because this is very much, in my opinion, equally like a World War I book as it is a somewhat fantasy leaning book. So I personally loved it because I like that stuff, but it's definitely something to be keeping in mind if you're interested in it. But if you do think that you are, I would absolutely recommend it. So those are my 14 favorite books that I read in the year of 2024. Overall, I feel like 2024 was a bit of an odd reading year, because I feel like there were some standouts, but then there were a lot of really average to mid reads, like not things that I didn't like, but things that, looking back, they don't stand out. I don't really feel strongly towards them, but I do feel strongly towards my favorites, which of course is why I wanted to talk to you about them. So I hope you liked hearing me talk about my favorites and hearing about those. And if you have thoughts on any of these books too, I would love to hear them. Please comment down below if you do, if you'd like to talk to me about it. Also like this video if you liked it, and you can always subscribe if you would like to see more content from me, which I am always endeavoring to create, even though I am sometimes a few weeks between times when I can film. But I always really appreciate the support, so thank you so much, and I hope that you liked it. So with that said, that is it for this video, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!